Being single is not a trial. Being married is not supposed to be a trial. Having children is not a trial. They are all opportunities that we can either make the most of or we can completely waste. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. And today I thought we might talk about some of the online content that I see quite a bit from Christians, which is all about dating, relationships, singleness. I have briefly touched on Redefining before, so if you want to check out that video you can. It wasn't really a video about dating. It was more to do with advice that they're giving about general mental health and telling people that depression and anxiety are sins. So if that is of interest to you, then feel free to check that out. But today's video, I'm going to be looking at a short from Daily Disciple. And for the record, I quite enjoy his content. I think it's reasonably good. But that doesn't mean that we can't disagree as Christians and we can't have different perspectives on things, especially depending on life experience and things like that. If you're new to the channel and you're wondering who I am a postgraduate psychology student, and I have also worked in public service for most of my career. I'm in my early 40s, and even though I grew up Christian, I spent the majority of my adult life being either agnostic or actually pagan. So I was only saved in 2020, which means it's been, almost 4 years, but not quite. So even though I grew up Christian and I learned a lot about the scriptures and I learned a lot about Christianity, it didn't really have like a personal impact for me at that time. I never really stopped believing that there was a God, but it was more of an abstract concept rather than a personal relationship. So if you're interested in my testimony, that is also available on my channel. But the thing is, because I was not Christian throughout my 20s and 30s mostly, it meant that I lived just like a fairly regular worldly person. I had relationships, I moved in with people who I was not married to. So I did that twice, and both instances were abusive and quite toxic. I did get married and then divorced after years of assault. And then as a freshly single person, I decided to do something very drastic, and I left all of my friends and family, and I moved interstate to a place where I knew nobody and I had never lived before, and that was Tasmania. So that's where I still am, and I am now remarried. So I would say that in terms of life experience, I have probably been through the gamut. So maybe that is useful to you in some way, perhaps not. By the way, if you hear scratching sounds, that's one of the dogs. You be a good boy? Okay, that's enough about me. Let's have a look at the short from Daily Disciple.
Please stop saying this to single Christians. Singleness is a gift, a blessing. Enjoy it. Bro, hold up. Wait a minute. Yes, the gift of singleness is a gift. What Paul had. He didn't have the desire to get married. He was very content with being single his whole life. Undesired singleness, however, though is a blessing from God, as all things are, can still be a trial in someone's life. I fully recognize that we should rejoice and give thanks in all things, and recognize that God is at work behind the scenes. But that does not mean that everything that happens to us is yippee-skippy. You don't have to see everything in your life as great and wonderful just because it's part of God's plan. It is a part of God's plan, but it's also hard. Just recognize that it's not wrong to see a trial as a trial. It's actually only when we begin to acknowledge that we're having a hard time can we give those feelings to God. We thank God in all things, but we can also recognize the emotional and mental challenge that undesired singleness has on a person.
Okay, well, there's a bit to unpack there. So one of the things that I will just say straight off the bat is 100% Christians misuse certain passages of scripture, and they misquote things all the time, and it's absolutely terrible. So he's correcting a misuse of scripture there, where people say, oh, singleness is a gift. It's only a gift for some people. The gift of singleness is for some people, and for other people, singleness is not their gift. So, not everyone has the gift of tongues, not everyone has the gift of prophecy, not everyone is a teacher, etc., etc. So being single is not necessarily the desired end state that someone wants to be in. It just happens to be the phase of life that they are currently in. I think that's an important distinction to make, and I think that it's very good advice to tell people to stop saying that singleness is a gift, because it's not a gift for everyone. It's kind of like saying that infertility is a gift. Like, not everyone sees it that way. Myself in particular, I have never been able to conceive. That's not something that I am able to do. That's not how God has blessed me in any way. Does that mean that I am not blessed by God just because I have infertility issues? However, the one thing that I do disagree with in this particular video is his use of the word trial. Being single is not a trial. And one of the things that I see constantly with Christians on social media is they seem to turn normal life events like being single, or in fact being married, into trials when they're actually not. Now, a trial, technically, if you're going to be biblical about it, is when someone is being persecuted for being a Christian. Like, that's a trial, that's a tribulation. Those are things that are for the kingdom of God and that Christians have to face in order to remain faithful. Comparing being single to being thrown into prison or having your head cut off in some countries, which still happens around the world today, like literally while you're watching this video, someone could be executed somewhere in the world for being a Christian. Comparing being single to that is kind of obnoxious, and it does sort of show the comfortable Western version of Christianity, when that's the most horrific thing that you have to deal with, is just being single. Now, in the same way that a lot of people are not choosing to be single and a lot of people are not choosing to be infertile, it can be an emotional issue. I'm not saying that you're not allowed to feel some type of way about it. But it's important to have perspective on things and to realize that there are some things that are just outside of your control, and to make the most of whatever phase of life you happen to be in. Now, I can't have children, but does that mean that I am useless as a person? Well, according to some Christians, yes. And I think that's one of the biggest cultural issues in Western Christianity, is that if you are single or if you are without children, then you are essentially not doing your part in kingdom building. And it's like, well, you might be called to something else entirely. God's purpose for your life might go well beyond just having a family. And that essentially was the whole point of why Paul was given the gift of singleness, is because he had much bigger things to do. As he said himself, married people have all of these other concerns, whereas single people can fully dedicate themselves to the kingdom.
I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord.
If anything, desiring marriage and desiring children is actually anti-biblical in many respects because it takes away from service to God, and instead we are in service to the people in our lives. One of the most toxic messages that I hear constantly in Christian content is that basically you have to put your life on hold until you are married and until you have children. And it's this thing of like, oh, well, you're single, so don't get too comfortable doing whatever it is that you're doing as a single person because you're going to need to stop doing that as soon as you're married. And that isn't necessarily true. Daily Disciple himself is a prime example of what happens when you are single. You have time to dedicate to YouTube channels and to ministry. Now, I'm not saying that every single Christian out there needs to have a social media platform and to create content. That's not necessarily people's forte. But what I am saying is that life is happening now. And being single is the only opportunity that you may have to do particular things before you have the commitment and responsibility of marriage or a family. Being single is not a trial. Being married is not supposed to be a trial. Having children is not a trial. They are all opportunities that we can either make the most of or we can completely waste. My experience of relationships and marriage before was a complete waste. It was a waste of my time, a waste of my energy, and in the end, it went nowhere. And there were situations in those relationships where I felt more lonely than I ever did as a single person. What Daily Disciple is really trying to get at is the crux of the issue with so many people, whether they are in relationships or not, and that is loneliness. According to research, loneliness is a bit of an epidemic. And not everyone is lucky enough to have pets. As I said before, I got divorced and I moved interstate, and I didn't really know anybody. I had to essentially start from scratch and build friendships and community from the ground up. And all I had with me was my dog and my cat. So there were a few Christmases and a few New Year's Eves that I spent without human company. I understand loneliness. I understand it from a practical point of view. I understand it from an emotional point of view. I have experienced it in many different forms. I have experienced it within relationships. I have experienced it without relationships. According to research, loneliness is a growing epidemic. And the main reason for that is because we are not living in natural circumstances. Not anymore. People used to live in kinship groups, KIN, and they were essentially tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone. Most people were related on some level, perhaps distantly or perhaps not. And in that environment, no one should have been lonely. I mean, they probably were, because you can be lonely in relationships. But theoretically, you would be surrounded by people who knew you and loved you. In today's modern society, families tend to be very dispersed. People move interstate, people move internationally, and they often don't see each other for extended periods of time. Rather than working on a family farm and that being your occupation, nowadays people go to jobs. And sometimes those jobs don't pan out and people leave or people get fired. So you don't really have like a stable community in your working life, even though you spend the majority of your time there. Your friendship groups tend to be very busy. They tend to be spread across multiple suburbs, if not multiple towns or cities. Everyone's lives are always crammed with activities and commitments that they have to do and things like that. And in the end, you often don't see people. Theoretically, a Christian community should be a place that replaces a lot of those missing relationships that we have in our lives these days. The church is supposed to be a safe community for Christians who have the same relationship with God. However, not everyone has that relationship with God who goes to your church. And not everyone who goes to your church is supportive of you. And you might go to a church which is so massive that you don't really know a lot of the people who go there. Maybe you have a small group, maybe you have a Bible study, but they can be sporadic at the best of times, and you don't necessarily get to know each other that well. So all of that loneliness and all of that disconnection from other people tends to be, I guess, kind of focused into feeling like the only relationship that can actually fulfill you is marriage. And that was never actually how we were supposed to function as human beings. Our spouse was not supposed to be the only friend that we have, the only confidant that we have, the only support system that we have. Waiting for someone to fulfill all of those expectations and expecting that they can fulfill all of those desires is pretty dangerous. For most people, it's just too much pressure. They literally can't live up to it. And for other people, it can be a means of controlling and exploiting their partner. Having survived abusive relationships, I know exactly how that works. Your time of being single really needs to be focused on trying to develop a relationship with God and trying to develop a community base so that you have good friends that you can talk to and people that you can rely on, so that you aren't completely dependent on a spouse if and when you find them, so that you're not going to make a choice to get married out of sheer desperation. Being single is not a trial, it's an opportunity. Being married is not a trial, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to build a life for yourself. It's an opportunity to build connections with others. And more importantly, it's an opportunity to learn more about God and to build that relationship as well. I had to get to a place with God and with myself where I was actually more than happy to spend the rest of my life single. I was fully committed to the single life, and the only reason that I decided to go out and try dating one last time was because I had the prompt from God, the push, if you will. I actually thought it would be a terrible idea, but I was prepared to be obedient to a certain extent. And the only reason why I continued to date is because I met my husband. But in the interim, I was doing plenty of things. I had a very busy life. I volunteered with multiple organizations. I was studying full-time. I had 2 jobs. I made YouTube content. And I have to say that as soon as I started dating my husband, and this is no shade on him, but my ability to regularly upload for YouTube definitely suffered. I was too busy and something had to give, and unfortunately it was this. But I have no regrets about that, and I don't think that God was at all displeased. I mean, he kind of introduced me to my husband at the start of his health crisis, so I was kind of needed elsewhere. So if you are a Christian single and you're wondering about this particular season of your life, don't sweat it. Just find the opportunities that you have in this time while you have it and make the most of it. You might have the gift of singleness or you might not. And if you don't, then be open to the possibilities, be open to the promptings of God if he has someone in mind for you. But don't make it the sole focus of your life. Don't pin all of your hopes and dreams and aspirations on marriage, because marriage is not designed for that. You don't want your relationship to collapse under the weight of your expectations for it. Don't imagine that God is punishing you for anything. If anything, He is preparing you. He is helping you to become a well-rounded person who is capable of being a functional adult and a good spouse. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you have some interesting experiences in this regard yourself. And don't forget to subscribe if you're new. I will see you next time. Thanks so much. God bless. Bye.